All right. Here we go again. Sunday, Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, actually, 8 p.m., although it's not dark outside yet. And here we go again. This is another solo episode, third episode. I don't, obviously, solo episodes to me aren't as ideal as I discussed in my last solo episode, but for the sake of consistency, for the sake of being disciplined, and for the sake of continuing to build my skills as a orator, as a conversationalist, and as hopefully an entertaining speaker, I'm going to keep this up. And because I do believe again that in the tremendous value of discipline combined with output of creative ideas or any kind of content is a recipe for success. Now, it's interesting because I just finished listening to the Huberman podcast. They just put out, I guess today is around, I think August 10th or so, or 11th. And he just put out a podcast with Dr. Martha Beck, who really was fascinating. And not his typical podcast, not his typical, or not really from my understanding. I don't listen to all his episodes, but I don't think it's his typical guest and not his typical conversations. And a lot of the conversation, but it's interesting because a lot of the conversations were based on things we don't necessarily that we don't necessarily feel like we're grounded in. The self-experience, following intuition, following our own sense of who we are, what makes us happy, how to pursue that, whether that's a recipe for success or not. And, he's a lot more he's a lot more, I guess you'd call it grounded, even though I don't know if one is more grounded than the other. And we've had this, really strange development in terms of our culture and our society that I've been actually thinking about for a long time, for many years. And that is that with the enhancement of technology and with the development of technology, and as our lives became better and easier, and when we say better and easier, I'm not referring to the way that we feel, I'm referring to the lives that we live, the safety that we experience, the availability of resources. We could talk about inflation, you could talk about politics, you could talk about, peace or not, or racism, or whatever you want to say, whatever you want to put out there. We live in a time where, a piece of sliced bread is a miracle, relative to 100 years ago. Forget about the grill that we use, forget about the ovens, forget about the washing machines, forget about everything. And so we objectively live in a better world, and an easier world, where instead of spending most of our time doing generally thoughtless acts, or generally speaking, a lot of the jobs that required our bodies but not our brains became replaced with automation. And the consequence of that is that we have more free time and more opportunity to kind of think about who we are, what we're feeling, how fulfilled are our lives. And we actually have this giant explosion, and it really kind of starts, you can kind of trace it if you want to look at poetry and music, and at least in the American culture, it kind of starts in the 50s and 60s. And kids growing up and people growing up now, and people that are finding themselves are living in a time right now where, because a lot of us are lucky to not have to spend all day in a factory, or being a milkman, or making newspaper deliveries, and things have become automated for the most part, or for a large part. We are now, all those jobs that used to distract us and used to keep us busy, and potentially even give us meaning to a certain extent, for sure, because it's meaningful to work and get compensated. It's meaningful to do something physical with your body and then get some kind of reward and currency for it. So I mean, even from, I mean, the difference of a feeling that I get from going into a classroom and teaching is total, and teaching for a couple hours and then getting a paycheck at the end of the every other week is a totally different feeling than making a commission on a sale that I spent 20 minutes on the phone with a customer and then sending over an invoice, collecting a check, sending the order to the warehouse, and then moving on with my life. There's something rewarding about the experience of actually putting your effort into something and getting something out of it. But because we live in a time where funds and resources and the kind of lives that we live are is the stuff we need to live enjoyable lives is more easily accessible. We now have to we're left with this free time where we start thinking about, well, who am I? Am I happy? What am I passionate about? What do I care about? How do I really want to spend my life if I wasn't doing this? If I wasn't doing sales, how would I want to spend my life? If I wasn't, as an accountant or a lawyer, how would I want to spend my life? If I wasn't a barista or a bartender, how would I want to spend my life? And sometimes the answer is I would like to do that, and then good for you, and that's amazing. And I'm really actually, I'm A, proud, B, impressed, and C, envious. It's a beautiful thing to be able to be compensated for what you enjoy doing. But because we live in this kind of world where we don't have to work as hard or put in as many physically manually exhausting hours of work, our minds are more free to wander. We're more free to be a little confused, and that kind of leads us into this whole mental health revolution and evolution. And my grandfather, who he just passed away when he was in his mid 90s or early 90s, and my other grandfather, who's still alive, doing well, he's in his mid to late 80s. They don't talk about things like mental health and depression and what's your dreams. And I mean, a lot of the and there's a big disconnect between them and their kids. And you actually kind of see it in their relationships, not just my family, but I mean, almost everyone I see from that previous generation, where there is this kind of feeling like our parents that raised us were a little, they just didn't, I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't relate to them. I couldn't have that. And yeah, sure, you could schmooze them. Yeah, you could love them. You could spend time with them. You could have games. Not to say that you don't have that, but I mean, if my dad had gone to my grandfather and said, I'm feeling this just intense dissatisfaction with my, with my job, with the way that I'm spending my time, my grandfather would laugh at him and tell him to go work for a bunch more hours, because that's what you would do. And that's what you're supposed to do. And that's the way that you deal with the hardships of life. But when we don't have that necessarily, it now allows us to explore uncharted waters. And it allows us to explore something new, and allows us to be aware of this world of possibilities of what does ignite me? What makes me feel like me, And yeah, as Robin Williams put it in Dead Poet Society, we could put our heads down and go about the dream, the life of achieving other people's ambitions. We could put our heads down and we could just say, you know what? Someone told me that it's really good to be an accountant. So I guess I kind of like numbers. I kind of like math. So I'll be an accountant, Or someone that told me it was really good to be a lawyer. Told me, it's really prestigious to be a doctor. And I don't really have so much passion for medicine, but you can make a lot of money and people will look at me and be proud of me, and they'll be impressed. I'm a doctor, I'm an anesthesiologist, or I'm a cardiologist. And again, they are incredibly impressive. And if you do it, I'm blown away. I'm impressed. This isn't to be degrading by any stretch of the imagination, but this is just to discuss the decision that people make to pursue something that might not be in their, what naturally calls to them. We don't follow our intuition when we follow other people's dreams and goals. And I've talked about this, on the podcast. I've talked about it quite a bit, actually, because I don't want to do the same thing to my son or to any of my future kids, which is I don't want to give them the pressure to live the life that I didn't get a chance to live. And so if my son's ambition is to be an accountant and I'm sitting here and I'm disdainful of accountants, which I'm not because some of my best friends are, but if I was, then, I should be pushing him to do what he wants to do. And I should take a step back and say, just because it's not intuitive to me and it's not my ambition doesn't mean that it's not his. And at a certain point, I'm gonna, and then I hope to keep the line of communication open so that he if he starts down the path and then feels like it's not really his path, rather than forcing himself to go through it for the sake of going through it, he could talk it out. And I think that a lot of us got to do the same things with ourselves. I think that, and this is what Martha Beck was talking about on Huberman's podcast, which is, we all have this sense and this guy, this little voice, this little sense inside of us that tells us that kind of, as we're born and as we start to become aware of the world and start exploring the world, we become, there are certain things that enamor us. There's certain things that just immediately just snag our attention, and we gravitate towards it. And then we can choose to either pursue that in some kind of way, shape, or form, or not. And if we don't, then what are you compromising? B, why are you compromising it? And what's it worth at the end of the day? And what's it worth for you? So, for example, you can say, well, it is worth it for me to compromise. I always wanted to be a fireman, or always want to be a policeman. But at the end of the day, I have to do sales because there's a cap on how much money I can make as a policeman, and I want to be able to live in a community, live in a place, have a big enough family that I can afford to, that being a policeman or a fireman doesn't afford me the opportunity to be able to support my family, and so I have to sacrifice my intuition, what I feel drawn to, what my soul feels ignited by. I'm going to have to put that aside now for other values and for other goals. And by the way, that's not necessarily, I don't even think, a bad thing, because everyone has multiple goals and everyone has multiple dreams, and you have different priorities. And you say, okay, well, I have 24 hours in a day, and X amount of those, I have a career, the way that I spend my time, that's really important to me professionally. And then I have the way that I spend my time with my family. It's really important to me. And I have my community that's really important to me, and who I'm surrounded with, and how safe is it, or how homey is it, how much of it is, because where you live and where you choose to live often becomes part of your identity and who you are. And how important is it for me to be here? Now, you might, a lot of the, a lot of life has to do with compromising and not being able to jam in all the lives that you want to lead into one lifetime. But and you have to weigh them, and you have to say, okay, well, while in this life I want to have a family and I want to live in this place, I'm going to sacrifice what I'm going to spend my personal time doing in order to pursue these other intuitive values and goals that I have, which is I want to live in Manhattan, say, or I want to live in Seattle, or I want to live in Wyoming. And in order to do that, I have to make X amount of money. In order to have a family, I have to have X amount of money. And at the end of the day, I at the end of the day, in order to achieve these other dreams, I'm going to have to compromise on one of them. And that's okay. So, and then there's so I think I think that's something that's really important to consider. I think it's really important to think about, because if you find, I think that a lot of us find ourselves compromising on something, and I think that's okay as long as you're spending your time making sure that those other intuitive, uh, spiritual, and I'm saying the word spiritual as in what your spirit is searching for, goals, as long as if you can compromise on some of them in order to achieve other ones for the time being. But if you're compromising on everything and you don't really know why, and you don't really understand what it is that you're pushing for, and you don't really understand what the values are that you're trying to accomplish, then that's, I think that's where the most hurt people are. And I actually, and I think that it changes. I mean, I know it changes who you are. I know, people like that become stunted and become hurt and become, they have to numb themselves or drown themselves, or they have to keep themselves just so distracted from the fact that either they don't even remember what it is. Like, I mean, you could spend so much time focusing on numbing yourself and drowning out your intuition that you may not even remember it anymore at a certain point. And at a certain point, you may not even know what it is anymore. Or you could try it, and then one of the most painful things is when you try it when you're a little older and you're so sad. Because you could see where your natural talent was, and you could see that you kind of, by ignoring it for so many years, you kind of missed the boat on it. And I don't personally believe that you could ever really miss the boat on a lot of this stuff. I think that we tell ourselves that because it's difficult to start new things and change our lives and take on new projects or new ideas or new anything, new hobbies, new crafts, new passions. It's really, really difficult to do, and it's really, really difficult to do well, and it's really, really, really difficult to do with discipline, where you don't know if there's ever going to be any reward, and you don't know if there's going to be any kind of, gold at the end of the rainbow, but all you're doing is just pursuing it. And because you love it, because it's something that just expresses itself, that just speaks to you and just tells you who you are, and just, when you feel like while you're engaging in it, you're talking to an old friend, like an old part of yourself. And that's how I really feel about, personally, obviously, about, I don't really know what, I think it's the act of sharing, the act of bringing other people up, and the act of seeing other people doing better and feeling better or being entertained or finding a little bit of that spark of themselves because of me. And to have that and to be able to help people find that in any way, shape, or form, to me is incredible. And a lot of it can be done. And the problem is that it's not even a problem. It's actually, I'll call it a blessing. The blessing is that it could be done in so many different types of ways. This could be done in a fun, with a bunch of fun conversations, sitting in the pool with a bunch of friends. This could be, this could be done with, um, I'm sorry about that. I got distracted because I'm still at my parents' for another couple of days for the summer. I don't know if I discussed it in any of the podcasts completely, but I definitely implied or started to talk about the fact that I've been living at my parents' house for the summer while I'm in between houses. It should be another week, but I mean, there's been an abundance of distractions and noises coming from all over the place and people walking in and out in the middle of these episodes. So, on one hand, there's not much you could do about it. On the other hand, you want your material and you want what you do to be done the best way possible. So it's a little frustrating. Anyway, what I was saying that was regarding my personal passion, the part of the blessing of helping people become better, feel better and do better, and feel like the world around me is a little bit of a better place, and I'm a little bit of a better person, and I learn from other people and they learn from me, and there's this reciprocal and mutual trade-off benefit love of sharing experiences. It's really wonderful. One of the blessings and one of the challenges at the same time of that being my passion is that there's so many different avenues for it to manifest itself. This could be in a this could be, with a group of guys just having fun and knowing how to lay back and have a good time and kind of ease people from their tension and help them, conquer the rest of their day. This could be in terms of having serious conversations, listening to people out, asking them questions and prodding them in the right direction to help them kind of discover what it is that they have, that what it is that's on their mind. And, I mean, I have the luxury, I've had the luxury in my life of being surrounded by people that are aware, or surrounding myself with people that are truly, truly not only aware of themselves, but also extremely expressive and articulate. And I've learned how to be articulate of how I feel and what I'm going through, and for better or for worse, just all the wonderful things and all the sad things and all the anxiety-ridden things and everything in between. I've learned how to be articulate, and then to kind of ask people these kind of questions that help them articulate it themselves, and you could see the relief as they say it. And you don't, a lot of times, listen, there's certain, obviously, everyone would like a solution to whatever they're going through, and everyone would like an answer to whatever problem they're dealing with, of course. No and ifs or buts about it. However, even if you can't, just talking about it and just knowing that there's a game plan and just knowing that you can actually pinpoint a problem or pinpoint a good thing and say, this is something that just made me feel really, really wonderful and really, really fulfilled. And there, and I'd ask, oh, what about that? Was there something about the way that you talk to someone? Was it about who you were talking to? Was it about the fact that you were talking to someone, and that you usually, most of your job doesn't require that you be very social? What is it? What is it about what it is that you experience that's so pleasant? Because let's see if there's a way for you to be able to integrate that positive, that intuitive feeling of just, I'm so happy and I feel so great and I just feel so fulfilled. How do you integrate that into our lives? So on one hand, there's so many different ways to kind of help people, and through my life, I've bounced through different phases of trying to get these of trying to make a professional career out of it. And um, on one hand, again, it's great that there's so many different ways of doing it. On the other hand, there's also a lot of jobs aren't pigeonholing that, and a lot of jobs, I mean, I had a very difficult time. I have a very complicated relationship with school and with education system, and I respect it, and I think that it's important. And I personally have had a lot of struggles going through it. Um, I was never a really great student until college, and even then, I was only able to really. I have a very poor sense of discipline for things that I do not that I have absolutely no interest in. So, so college was great because it was the first time I was able to just take the classes that I wanted to take and the classes that I was interested in, and I was able to excel in all of them. And anything that was even, remotely fascinating to me, any topic. And yeah, even if the way that the class would, let's say, grade, and the way that I would express how well I knew the material, even if that was harder for me, the class itself was always so enjoyable. Whatever classes that I would pick, for the most part, other than the prerequisites that I was forced to take, um, either I didn't even care that I got a C plus in psychology, or a C in some kind of, I don't know, movie literature kind of class, which was it was, I think, 8 o'clock for 2 hours on Monday and Wednesday morning, taught by a French speaking woman who I have since forgotten her name. She wasn't anyone I was close with. I would drag myself out of bed at 7. I would, I would, get a coffee, make a quick breakfast, and hop out into the cold Binghamton air with my and not even my backpack on, because most of the time we were watching a film, go through the history of film. I'd bring my computer usually, and you would try your best to stay awake during the either during the movies or during the lectures. Actually, that was the first time that I saw that class. Was the first class that I was introduced to The Godfather, and then it was also the first class I was introduced to the movie Inception, both of which I love. and have loved since then. And I've watched many, many times since then. But anyway, the point is that there's a lot of jobs that, I mean, it's hard to, while there's a lot of different opportunities to find ways for, for my particular passion to manifest in my life, there's not a lot of jobs that actually revolve around that. And even though everyone can kind of use it, it's very difficult to find it. And I have a very hard time with schooling, the notion of going back to school to become a psychologist or to become a professional in some kind of fashion in that kind of world is extremely, extremely daunting to me. I was actually talking to someone about this recently. I was at a friend's house the other week for a barbecue, and I came over, actually post barbecue. I just came in to hop in the pool, and I come in. I'm all sweaty from a jog. I'm not wearing a shirt because I thought I was going to jump straight in the pool. My friend didn't tell me that he had guests over who I hadn't met yet, and so I'm showing up. They're all having a good time. The four of them are sitting together eating and talking, and a sweaty, smelly dude without a shirt on just pops in, and that was me. And so I hop in the pool, and then I'm talking. I'm talking to the husband. He's from South Africa, and I'm trying to kind of get a little idea of what this dude's about. And you can kind of tell, you can tell when you start a conversation with someone how how engaged, or at least I can tell how engaged I'm about to be in that conversation, and B, whether there's someone I want to engage with at all. And there was something about the way that there was that he looked when I asked him a question, ask, oh, where do you live? Where are you from? Tell me a little bit about yourself. That he kind of took that. You could see that he took that as an invitation to open himself up a little bit, or and he was and looked and he was clearly willing to establish a relationship with me. And and you could tell based on his eyes, you could tell based on the fact that he was holding eye contact while we were talking, and and I would ask him follow-up questions, and he would go into great length to elaborate on his story. And and he told me that he had a complicated relationship with school as well. Started college twice. I think he got one degree. He started college, for psychology, and then dropped, and then I don't think he didn't quite finish it. And I said, "Do you?" And he started his own business where he is working, obviously full time on his own little business, his own company. And I was inquiring. I was like, how much of your time does the company take? Does this business take? Okay, it takes, I don't know, 7, 8 hours a day. Okay, great. And I said, and he has a newborn. I said, and how much time, like, do you think do you want to go back to school? Do you think you have time with a newborn and a regular job and being married that you have time to do this? And he said, yeah. He said, I'd have the time, especially because, and he elaborated. He says, and this is actually, I'm not sure if I said it or he said it. I think he said it. But he said, listen, at the end of the day, today in 2024, it's as easy as it ever was to get an undergraduate degree. You could do it online. You could be flexible. You could have flexible hours. You have your assignments that are due X amount of, X times a week. Let's say you have assignments due 3 or 4 times a week, and you have X, Y, and Z reading you have to do, and you have to respond to, whatever amount of posts, and you just go through all your classes like that. And sometimes you have a class, sometimes you have a lecture, sometimes your camera has to be on, sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, it's easier than it's ever been. You don't have to go to a school. You don't have to you don't have to actually sit in a lecture hall with 400 other students and deal with the nuances of actually getting not actually get well, of being in a standard education, physical education space. And so I said, so it sounds like there's no reason why you shouldn't do this. He said, well, I'm already, I don't know, 29, 30, 31. I already started school twice and I have this job, and, I feel like it's a little too late in my life to get into this. And I told him, and obviously you give the best advice to, and it's always easy to give the best advice. It's a lot harder to follow your own advice even. So listen, that's how long is it going to take to get your undergrad degree, right? 2 years, 3 years, 4 years online, right? It's like, so in 4 years, you're going to be 34, 35 anyway. And you could do this on your own time. So why not be 34, 35 years old and have that degree, and you could start, and you could start practicing, or you could start actually doing it. And I said, the time's going to pass anyway, and your time's going to pass anyway. And if you have the flexibility to make this happen while time is passing one way or the other, I understand if you have to compromise and you have to sacrifice. Listen, I have a family, I have kids, I have another job, and it just doesn't work. I can't be in class from 11 to 1 and then from 3 to 5 3 days a week. I can't do it. But you don't necessarily have to do it that way, or he doesn't have to do it that way. And we talked about it, and and you could tell. I mean, you could tell he gave him a lot to think about. And a lot of times at that point, that's like, that's a true version of us when we expose. And generally, I was talking to my buddy Zach about this in the last episode, but it's very easy to actually open ourselves up to people we just met, because if you intuitively feel like you can trust them, and let's say your intuition is wrong, or let's say even though I seem like a nice guy, it turns out that I'm a real piece of crap. Um, you felt like you could trust me, and you opened up something real and true about yourself, that whether or not I was deserving of receiving that, of sharing that with you, you spoke it, you said it, you felt it. You had you had nothing to lie about, as far as I know, and we're as close to the truth as we're going to get with, truthful as we're going to get with, to even ourselves, because most of the time we won't even admit it to ourselves. Most of the time we'll say it's too late, it's too hard, it's too difficult, it's too complicated. Um, and there's so many ways to make things happen today on the side. And so, I mean, full circle from what we're, from what we were talking about earlier, which is that nowadays, because we aren't glued to desks, and we're not glued to the factory floor, and we're not even necessarily glued to an office. Now is the time, a point in time, where there's an unprecedented potential for anyone and everyone to kind of at least acknowledge and feed that authentic part of ourselves, that true part of ourselves that we're waiting for, and that's been waiting to be acknowledged our entire lives. And we don't have to shove it to the side anymore as much as we had to. And now we can even think about it, and now we could talk about it, and now we could act on it. Just like, I mean, at the end of the day, I was talking to a couple of friends of mine, and I told them I wanted to start this podcast, and they said they said, well, okay, so it's going to be great. You're going to put out a podcast once a week. I'm like, no, man, I don't want to do once a week. I want to do 3, 4, 5 times a week, like 3 or 4, 5 times a week. I said, yeah. I said, well, first of all, I enjoy, and second of all, what's an hour and a half? What's an hour and a half a day, or an hour and change a day, for at least, again, I would like to. I'm going to work on starting to have longer, more in-depth conversations. It's harder to do up by myself, but longer and more in-depth conversations, and kind of varying a little bit more, having more variety of guests, which I'm working on. And that's a lie, I haven't worked on it yet, but I've worked on it a little bit. Um, but at the end of the day, I was like, in order to, wouldn't you, you don't have an hour and a half, you don't have 4 hours a week to dedicate to something that you love, that can get that by putting those 4 hours in, starting now, that you should be able to feel and experience some kind of success. Forget about whether anything actually manifests. The fact that you find it so difficult to find 4 to 6 hours a week doing anything that you love is sad. It's scary. It shows the kind of world that we're in. And I guess it's not really. There's no there's there's forces to blame, but there aren't people necessarily to blame. And a lot of people, for example, we live in a world that's designed, that's using every tool and every means possible to keep us as invested and as distracted and as focused on anything but whatever that particular tool or program or platform is. So, from a social media perspective, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, I mean, what you're essentially doing is you're having a David and Goliath fight. You're having a fight where these enormous companies are hiring psychologists and are hiring marketing people and are hiring business people and are hiring, the most advanced, the best of the best in the world for one goal, which is to keep us on the app as long as possible, to take up the most amount of our time, most active amount of our time possible, and just let it slip away into nothing, let it slip away into data that they could sell to advertisers. And you can have Netflix spend, and HBO and Disney Plus and Max and Peacock and whoever it is invest again with the same forces, the same psychologists, the same marketing people, the same business people, the same tech people, the same coders. They're investing in keeping you and keeping me in front of the screen, in front of just watching, and this is for you. And next episode starting in 3, 2, 1. You don't even have to turn it off, and no ads, and so it's one again. It's just one person. It's just me, and it's just you, and it's just one individual against an entire army with indescribable amounts of money, and the money is all being put to work to keep us to keep us there, to keep us distracted. It's really, really hard to fight that. It's really, really hard to say no. I'm not going to consume this junk food. I'm going to look for something healthy and look for something real and look for something that will help me grow and help me become bigger and help me become better. And this life that I'm living, have it meaningful. Have my 20s mean something. Have my 30s mean something. Have my teens mean something. Have my teen, and build on everything and take the time to experiment and take the time to try new things out. And whatever you do, you kind of have to do it with all the attention that you can muster, which which today is hard to do, and all the time that you have, which today we actually have so much more time than I think we have. And and at the end of the day, we can do it. It's so difficult to. And so, I mean, one of the things that I really hope to be able to achieve, and there's so many good forces out there too, and there's so many wonderful ways to, so many amazing tips and amazing people out there who who I draw inspiration from. I won't say like me because they're doing it first and they're doing it better than me, but who I draw inspiration from to replicate them, that they say, I'm going to help you get out of this pit. And you have to help yourself ultimately, but if you but right now it's all these forces against you and all this money and all these people and all these jobs and all the top professionals against you. And you know what? Now it's going to be against me and you. Now it's going to be against the two of us. Now it's going to be against the three of us. And now it's going to be against the people. And be yourself and think for yourself and decide for yourself and look into a narrative, into any narrative. And this isn't political by any stretch of the imagination. This is human. This is it's so much easier to not be yourself, and we're constantly being told to not be ourselves. But that's all we really, but that's all we innately want, and we don't feel like we're satisfied, and that we're going through, and with all our mental health awareness, it's really difficult. It's really easy to say, to diagnose yourself and say what you have. It's really, really hard to do something about it and to find your way into it. And I'm not, I mean, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about regular life, because I think regular life is enough to drive anyone up the wall. Today was just a extremely, extremely difficult day for me because again, I'm closing on a house soon, and I'm spending all the money that I've saved, since I was 18, and the notion of separating with it is making me sick, and the notion of starting from the beginning is making me sick, and the notion of what, especially now, which is I think that I've already understood and I've already come to terms with the fact that I'm going to look for other avenues to build myself and to be able to support my family and support my life. And the other avenues are going to be in avenues and in ways that I find to be meaningful, because I don't think part of the curse of being a creative, part of a curse of being someone that is not very good at fitting into any kind of particular box is that jobs are really hard. That structure, that and I have no problem being disciplined, and I have no problem putting in hours and hours and hours of work into anything that I do, but I have to love it and I have to care about it. And there are people that could do that without that, and I think that that's incredible. I think that's respectable. I think that that's admirable, um, and I can't do it. And so now all at one time, I feel like I've come to this realization within the last couple of weeks that I can't keep on doing this, and I'm going to have to build something up, something new, something unique for myself. And while I do that, I'll be parting with all the money money I've ever saved in my life, and that's great, and that's scary as hell, and that's scary as all hell. And so today I was just riddled with it, and I don't, and I just told, I didn't go into it more than I had to. I just told my wife and I told, my family that was around me, that was here with me, like this is what I'm feeling. I am like, like, are you okay? And instead of saying, yeah, no, sorry, instead of saying yes, I'm like, no, I am so stressed out right now. And they're like, why? I'm like, I don't want to talk about it, but I'm so stressed out right now. And then I talked to my wife about it a little bit. And then, because she was excited about it and she's very excited about the house, but, um, and I am too, but I think my excitement for what is going to come is what was being stifled by what is currently happening in the avenue to get there. And at the end of the day, I keep on saying at the end of the day, but every beginning is hard, and starting anything from scratch is hard. Starting a marriage from scratch is hard. Starting a podcast from scratch is hard. Starting, buying, moving into a house and spending all the money you saved is hard. All these things are hard, and that's that's okay. It is hard. It's allowed to be hard. And my wife and I went out. We went to a couple of breweries upstate New York. We went to Ober Creek. Shout out to Ober Creek Brewery. Um, Phenomenal IPAs, untapped, beautiful, the beautiful little farm kind of vibe. And then Plan B Brewing, also really cool place, and definitely unique beers. There's a pickle beer on tap. I had a dark lager, but also just out there, beautiful grounds, sprawling woods, and tons of cool places to sit, tons of cool places to hang out. And we went out and we just, and we talked a bit, and we didn't talk a lot, and and I told her what I was feeling and where I was coming from, and but and we were out for probably 4 or 5 hours, and by the end of our trip, I felt, I would say 85% better or 80% better, just not even necessarily not nervous, but just more at peace. I think rather than shoving the anxiety aside, and rather than ignoring it or trying to numb it, I just kind of felt it out and felt it through. Um, I felt it through, and I felt so much better. And then I went for a jog at the end of it all, and I got back, and I still had a little bit of that weight, a little bit of that tension, just in my chest. And I went for a jog, and I worked it out. I worked it out, and I breathed it out, and I thought it out, and I listened to podcasts, listened to some Tedeschi Trucks band, who unfortunately I have a ticket for their show, and on August 25th, I'm not going to be able to make it upstate New York, because I'll be hopefully in Florida by then. That's the plan. Or back in Florida by then. So, um, I just went through it, and I don't remember the last time that I was able to deal with something that challenging in such a healthy way. Maybe a breakup eventually, because I think that after so many breakups, I was able to kind of learn the formula for dealing with the breakup. But now I'm gonna have to, and now I kind of feel that as I go through each of these different stages in my life and going through different experiences with kind of regular frequency, meaning I mean, I went through a bunch of breakups. I got married. I kind of learned how to be in a relationship at that point. I was afraid. I was petrified, so nervous, so anxious to be a father. Um, Obviously, it's a lifelong trip, but I'm working on it, and it's a challenge. It's hard and it's exhausting, but it's the most incredible thing. And there's something so scary about putting yourself out there in a podcast, especially for talking the three solo episodes for over 45, 50 minutes apiece. You're, you're vulnerable and you're out there, but I believe and I really hope, I really believe, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it, that A, it's going to pay off. B, I think that there's a tremendous value, even if one person hears it. Um, and one person is able to is able to kind of relate to it and say, he's saying what he's saying. I kind of knew, or I kind of felt, but I never was able to put it into words. And now I kind of get, and now I completely get it. And now I kind of see how this kind of fits in my life. And if that happens to one person, even if it's for a day or for a week or for an hour, and it just changes the way that they interact with the world around, with their world that they're living in, then to me it's worth opening up like this and being vulnerable like this. And to me it's worth putting myself out there like this. And this is the second time that I've bought a house. The first time was I bought with a partner. It was originally an investment, but that was also, I mean, I dealt with the same terrifying experiences. The same, I had to put a lot of money down, and then at the time I was just, my wife and I were homeless. We just got married, so we didn't really have a place to. We were supposed to move to apartment. It didn't work out. Um, the the owner of the apartment agreed on a price that was lower than what the building's management wanted to wanted to accept, because they saw that the building was going up in demand, and they didn't want to set a precedent for keeping people at that price point. So they actually rejected us. So we're now home. We were homeless. My wife and I were crashing my mother-in-law for a couple of weeks, and my father-in-law, and then we did that, and that was scary as hell too, because you're trying to find a house, and it's an investment property, and what's a good investment? How much do you want to spend? How much of our money do we have? What to go in to buy a house? And then I'm dealing with a real estate agent I never dealt with before, and a mortgage company I never dealt with before, and I've got to get X, Y, and Z documents and prove X, Y, and Z income, and everything was just scary, and everything was overwhelming, and then it was done, and then it was quiet, and I hope I don't have to do this again for a long time, but I did it again, and I'm not gonna be, I don't think I'm ever, no breakup's ever gonna be pleasant. No financial insecurity is ever gonna be pleasant. No finding a house is ever gonna be pleasant. But what you can do is you can have the confidence in yourself and understanding to know, listen, I'm anxious. I know, because I know that it's a big deal. I know that there's a big deal. I feel a lot. I know there's a big deal. I'm overwhelmed and I'm tense but I've dealt with this. And I felt, and not only that, this feeling of anxiety. You and I are familiar. You guys, you and I, we know one another, and I know how to, and I'm here to listen to you, and I'm here to consider what you have to say, and think about what you have to say, and really hear you out and feel you out, and then move on with and then continue, and to, and like anything in the world, anxiety, that at least I've found in my life, that my anxiety, when it gets built up, if I keep on shoving it down, it gets worse and worse. And if I keep on trying to shut it up, it gets worse and worse. And then I listen to it for a couple of minutes, or I listen to it for a couple of hours, and I just acknowledge it. I don't fight it. I don't embrace it. I just, is what it is, and I listen to it. And then once it's heard, it kind of just goes, okay, I've said my part, I've said my piece, and now I'm done. And it kind of just disappears for now. And that's a good thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing to have, to understand your relationship with the different aspects of yourself. And I can't help but think about the way that, Inside Out 2, you know, really, really, really did an incredible job to actually physically portraying this, like putting actual physical, like physical characters and storylines and actual objects and things to all these emotions and all these very complex issues, but they do it so beautifully. And one of the, this in these new emotions that Riley, who's the protagonist of the story, experiences, one of them is anxiety, and she's the one that's the leader that gets out of control. And a lot of time, and then at the end of the movie, they had to just listen to her, and there was a time for her to speak, there was a time for her to take a step back, and there was a time for her to be, and not to fight her, and not to send her somewhere far away, but to have her there, and when she was useful and when she was needed, to let her come out a little bit, and listen, and then move, and then move back away. And I think that's really, that's really an incredible thing. I don't really, I hope to have, I think, at least two or three guests lined up for this week. I am going to, these are all people that I already, know, I'm friends with, I'm close with. It's fun to talk to. I'm sure they're going to be great conversations. I'm looking to, I'm going to start reaching out to people. I'm trying to figure out the right type of people to reach out to get onto a podcast, because I'm sure that everyone that is good at everything, excuse me, and successful at everything, they get a million requests to be on podcasts that no one ever heard of before all the time, and I'm sure it's difficult. So I guess I'll have to use my sales experience to kind of help pursue and help further this dream, this goal, this passion. So that's it for now. Bye, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow, hopefully. Bye, everyone.